Welcome back to Return to More. I'm Jonathan Moore. Today's conversation is about living authentically, choosing to show up as your full self, embracing growth, and making the most of the life you've been given. Because you see, authenticity isn't something you arrive at, it's something you practice every day. And one of the people I've seen live this out in real time is my friend William Whitfield. William serves as an associate director, and he's done everything from architecture to advocacy, from blueprints to budgets. But at the heart of everything he does is a caring concern for the community he lives in. He's a champion for inclusive leadership. He's also a man of faith. And I'm so excited that I get to share this platform today with my friend William. Before we welcome him in, I just want to share a reflection on how we first met. Our paths first connected during our time in Arizona. I remember observing William, who at that point was a professional and well entrenched in the community. And I remember thinking just how nice and approachable and uplifting he was. William's primary motivation, especially in social circles, was to bring people together, and to bring people together to create a space of laughter, of joy, of light, if you will. And so Will and I have stayed connected as he's transitioned through various phases in his professional and personal life, as well as I. And we both currently find ourselves residing now on the East Coast. And so I'm thankful to have him today as part of that conversation. And with him today, I know that you'll learn that that kind of presence that I just described of William doesn't happen by accident. It is chosen. Please help me welcome William to the show. Welcome, William.
Thank you. I'm excited to be on the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So today's conversation is living authentically. And we know it's something that, requires a lot of intention. We know that depending on how you identify or where you are in life, there can be a lot of factors and forces that may cause you to doubt yourself, that may cause you to doubt decisions you've made, or sometimes that can even chip away at your worthiness, if you will. And so I'm excited to talk to you today about tools and strategies we can implement to live authentically. So first, I want to start with a question for you, William. When do you feel most like yourself?
I feel most like myself. Interestingly, when I come home from work, sometimes, it'll just be me and a pup. My partner is probably still working late. And I turn on some music and I just start dancing around and singing to myself and lip syncing and all those things. Like, it's just like my quiet time just to chill out and kind of reflect, but just to get rid of the work day. So that's typically when I feel most like.
I love that. Any genre of music in particular, or favorite artist?
Ooh. Yes. Well, favorite artist is Rasan Patterson, but like genre of music would be neo soul, R&B. Somewhere in there, I'm discovering new artists to me now, so that's exciting too. Like Amber Marcus is definitely
Oh,
someone that I love and listen to. So yeah.
okay. Still on, so as you mentioned, that same vein, R&B. So there are three albums that are just sort of my go-to when I don't feel like exploring and I know I need that pick me up with like the R&B sound. So on Apple Music, of course, Anita Baker's Greatest Hits. That's one that I go to. Toni Braxton's Greatest Hits, because she has some ballads, but she also has some up-tempo things. And then I would say the third one in that vein, Jasmine Sullivan. Um, she's another one that I gravitate to. Now I love others, but those are three. Like if I need to be around the house, especially if I'm trying to sing along, I'm singing to one of those three. So as you mentioned, which I love, you're letting us into one of the ways in which you decompress, coming home music, loving on your pub. Um, how did you sort of develop this style of coming towards yourself or coming back to yourself? Like, where does that come from?
Ooh, child, that was the one thing. There's like threads from childhood that last into adulthood. So on the rare occasion that I would have the house to myself, which was rare, having seven siblings and, two parents, and people had keys to the house and they were going in and out. But on those rare occasions I had the house to myself, I blast my music, sing in my room, just, be away from everybody. And that just helped out, especially when I moved to Phoenix. And, Phoenix was a interesting time in my life where it was both fun and lonely. So, in those moments, I just would blast my little music and just decompress. So it's the one like thing that I've carried from childhood to adulthood.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, and not funny, haha, but one of the strands in many of the conversations we've had are how all of our experience today are interconnected, and many of them relate to childhood. In an earlier episode, I had a conversation with another good friend of mine who's a clinical psychologist, and we talked about friendships and relationships and how relationship to self as well as others all connects back to childhood. So that's an interesting connection to hear you say that it goes back to childhood and some of the context in which you grew up in. I will say a follow up question. Was there, even within that, was there a particular season or moment that contributed to, your desire or your approach to life in this way?
I have to say a moment that actually like really sticks out from childhood, and this is more so tween teen era, was Mary J. Blige, My Life came out, and I was just like, oh my God. I don't know why I was attracted to the album because
Yeah.
I didn't know what the heck she was talking about or really going through. Like, I wasn't going through those relationship issues, but it was a time where I was trying to understand who I was, and I didn't want to label myself as being gay or being, cis or any of the things that was thrown at me. And so it just seems like her attitude and her approach to my life kind of synced up with how I was feeling at the moment. Um, yeah, and then from there, it just kind of took off. I just listened to music just by and by through and through. But Mary J. Blige, My Life was a big one that kind of stuck out to me. I speak in albums and early movies.
I think that we're very aligned in that way. One of the things we have in common is there a favorite song on the album?
Ooh, yes. And I'm singing it in my head, but it was like with the Barry White beat to it.
Oh,
I forgot what that was.
I'm sure someone will let us know in the comments if it doesn't come
Mhm.
to us. Um, have you had a chance to see her in concert?
Yeah, that was the first concert I ever went to. My
Oh,
best
really?
friend of over 30 years now. She was like, "Hey, we gonna go see Mary J. Blige." She knew she was my favorite artist at the time,
Yeah,
and I was like,
yeah.
"Yeah, of course." So that was my first concert, and yeah. So Mary, she was instrumental at certain points in my life. Not as much now. I love her
Yeah, yeah,
though,
yeah,
but
yeah. No, I think she would love to hear that. I still have my, it's not a guilty pleasure, but one of the albums I love is her first one, the 411. So I have that downloaded and saved, and I could listen to that. There's only one skip, but love that album for sure. So, an earlier fan, absolutely. I don't really listen to much of her now, as well. Um, well, thank you for sharing that. That's fantastic. And so for those who are listening or watching, you'll know William and I are both Virgos, and so I think one of the ways in which we stay connected is we're able to often engage from a similar frame of reference or a similar school of thought in some of our conversations, especially around pop culture. So um, I just want the audience to know that. So to pivot, so you've often heard, and I think I've said this, or you may have heard that many people feel as if they're just living on autopilot, right? Like they're going through the motions. They have goals or things they want to reach, but they're simply going to work. They may be taking care of a family. They may be trying to just take care of themselves, all the while showing up for others, whether at work or showing up for family, but not necessarily themselves. And so I want to hear from you. What does living authentically actually look like as a daily practice?
You know what? I feel like it's having a range of emotions throughout the day and connecting with those emotions. I'm learning now because my parents are in their 80s. My dad, Lord willing, will be 89 this year. So it's kind of like I connect with the autopilot piece, but also just trying to show up daily is something that I both work hard on and struggle with, right? Because there are some days where you can't, you're tapped out. And on those days, I will allow myself to be tapped out. And typically I won't. My daily journey is always like I'm up at 4:30, at the gym around 5:15. And then from gym go to work, and then work home and do some chores around the house really quickly because I'm a firm believer in don't just be sitting around the house and and you got stuff to do. So I'll do my chores, hang out with the pup, and then, my partner comes home, we talk and decompress. But there are just times where, he can be tapped out, I can be tapped out, and we're just sitting in silence. And that's good enough, you know. So just every day, and also I pray daily as well. And in my prayer, I'm just like, I want to be better than I was yesterday. And sometimes you can't meet that goal or that want, and I'm not going to be hard on myself for not doing it. I give myself like, hey, you tried, and you have tomorrow hopefully to try again. So
Yeah. I mean, you touched on a few salient things there. So the very first conversation well, it wasn't a conversation, it was an episode that I did return to more. One of the ways in which I did that was through boundaries, right? And so setting boundaries for what time is reserved for me, realizing that we obviously live life and have responsibilities, whether to our elderly parents or to other family or partners or even work. How do I then manage that in a way that is first helpful to me, because the old adage, you can't pour from an empty cup and all the other things. And so I hear you talk about that. And then it sounds like you've developed a practice for William's practice for how he centers himself. I heard you mention prayer. I heard you mention sometimes silence, sometimes conversation with your partner. Sometimes it's organizing. You mentioned chores around the house. For someone who maybe is not as in tune or doesn't necessarily have a practice for how they can live authentically or even return to more, what would you say to them about how to get started to even identify those things that might be helpful to them?
that's a good one. For me, it really was having something that was point of discipline and so I've always been I've always been athletic or into athletics. So working out was really kind of like that one point of discipline for me, and that's definitely carried me through just understanding how to start a good habit. If you want to consider, working out a good habit, but just starting something that you can that can just grow, like having that discipline point to be like, all right, I gotta get up, I have to do this. And you do it, and whenever I tell myself, I'm like, this is for the rest of your life. And you have to figure out what those points are. Like I said, at the beginning, we were talking about music being like that point for me. That's definitely a point, that common thread. And so it's like just being able to be healthy and focus on being healthy is a big common thread too. And then that starts my discipline. Like, how it looks. So then the next thing is like, all right, well, what else do you want to tackle? How does that look? And you might come out the gate real tough and be able to you'll be able to prioritize, and then life happens. And what happens when life happens, and you have to give yourself that ability to be okay with life happening at whatever time. But really it's just, starting off with one or two discipline points and building from there. So
Yeah, no, that's crucial. And as I hear you talk about discipline, I also heard you mention the connection of the practices you develop to the overall goal you have for yourself. So you mentioned the things that you're doing are for life. They're not necessarily for a particular season. Like, you're not working out for a thing. You're working out to be a healthy man, human being for the rest of your life. And I think that's a point that gets missed, right? We shouldn't and I won't judge, I would say it would be most helpful to develop these practices and think about them as a way of life. So I wonder, do you apply this same framework? So we're talking a lot about self, which is part of the conversation, but as you think about relationships we might have, whether friendships or even professional or decision making, would you apply the same framework to those elements as well, or is there a difference?
I think I do. Like, so I have long-lasting friendships, right? So, 30 years I've known you since like early 2010s, things like that. Like, I typically, this is going to sound very weird and definitely edit if it's just a weird thing, but I told my partner this. I'm a people collector. Like, I like to have the same people around, again, for the rest of my life. Like, I don't want to have a revolving door of friendships. Like, it should be, I know you, I've known you forever, and we don't have to talk every day. Um, but when we see each other, it's warm, it's inviting, it's exactly what it would be if we had seen each other every day. And so that I do I take like lifelong things very seriously. I take relationships very seriously. If I'm in a relationship with you, friendship, partner, family, this is lifelong, and that's what I think about when I approach just like now career, um, but yeah. So I do want to approach things, especially in my mid 40s, like this is it for the rest of my life. I want to have things around, people around. Um,
Yeah, we've talked in a prior episode about specifically about friendship. So as you mentioned that, I too share your same sentiment, and I would like to think my friendship circle reflects that frame of mind as well. But one of the things I'm recalling from that conversation that we touched on is that as people evolve, right, sometimes, and I forget the academic term, I had a conversation with my good friend who's a psychologist, so we were going in and out of academic speak. But the idea was that as we evolve, right, we shift, right? Some of our interests may shift, some of what parts of who we are might shift. And I'm curious as to what are your thoughts on how you navigate that through life's evolution. So everything that you've talked about in terms of the framework for sustaining healthy relationships in alignment with living authentically, what happens when we evolve and maybe the things we were once interested in we no longer are, or the people who we were once drawn to for whatever reason we no longer are.
I love that. It actually reminds me of like just recently. I won't say super recent, but maybe a few years ago, I had I won't even call it a falling out, because when I say lifelong, I really truly mean it. But there are going to be some moments, some seasons where friendships we have to back away, and that happened. A friend of mine that I've known since 1999, we had to like take us a huge step back, um, and in that time, neither one of us were nasty toward each other. We still were like, I miss you, I love you, just kind of figuring things out on my end. And both of us had traumatic things that happened almost at the same time, bad information that we got. And we were trying to understand how do we navigate this and deal with this and keep this very tight friendship. And we understood that maybe the friendship needed to take a seat back. Um, and we move forward individually, understanding where we are now. And so when we got back together, like I feel like our friendship is stronger now, because we did take that step back, because we did like do some self reflection and really work on ourselves. Because I would say that prior to that, I probably was not, I was a good friend, but maybe not the best friend that I could be. And now I'll show up a little bit differently, and I want to be there for her, and in ways in which I did not show up when we were in our 20s. But we do change, we do evolve, and for me, because my whole approach to life is that I want people to be around and I want the relationships to last, I'll do what I need to do. And if that's me taking a step back and figuring things out, then I'll definitely lean into that.
Wow. I mean, what you're saying is very powerful. I hear first that there's a lot of introspection in what you've outlined. You were willing to, start with self first. And I think we've heard that theme throughout all of the episodes this season is where whatever positive shifts we want to make or whatever ways we want things to be different have to first start with us. But then I heard you mention, it's reminding me of the previous episode where we talked about romantic relationships, but still very applicable to friendships, is the idea that you have to be willing to not only confront, but have a conversation around whatever rift or conflict is occurring. Because you can't move to repair if you're not willing to engage in that conversation. And I heard you say, you talked about needing some space and time to be able to prepare for said conversation. But then once you had it, you all were able to then repair and move forward in a healthy way. Yeah. So much of living authentically, I believe, is reflected in the relationships we keep, not only with ourselves, but with others. And as someone who subscribes to your framing that, I don't just build friends for a time or two. I want these people that I'm connected to be around for however long God allows, recognizing that people do evolve in and out at different seasons. So we know that living authentically sounds very freeing, right? Like as we sit here and we talk about living authentically, and you've walked us through your practices, and we've also been able to provide ways in which the listener or the viewer could develop their own practices. We know that the reality is it's a daily, constant renewing, and we may not always feel like our best selves at times. My next question to you is, has there ever been a time when you felt you've struggled in this area to either show up as yourself or live according to William's expectations for authenticity?
Ooh, I love it. These questions are hitting. Actually, I feel like I'm struggling now. To be honest, and not to live authentically. I think that having lived in Chicago, moved to Phoenix, I was able to find like a tribe in Phoenix. Moved to New York, I was able to find people, but DC is a very interesting place. And I don't know that people group up for a lifetime here. I do feel like this is a very seasonal friendship relationship place. Because everything is like who you know, what you know, how do you know this person, and I don't subscribe to that. So this has been, and I've been here for 8 years now, a very challenging 8 years, in a whole different way in which Phoenix was challenging, and that was just in finding a partner because you
Hmm.
know
Yes, yes, fully
wasn't
relate.
enough melanin out
Yes, fully relate, fully relate.
there. But here it's just a lot. It's a lot different. So like coalescing and getting people to come out, I've not really gotten into in ways in which it was easier back home or even in Phoenix and even in New York. But here is definitely something where I'm challenged, but then I'm also not. The other part to the challenge is I I'm not. I don't care enough now. So it's like I want to show up authentically, but not if I have to. Not if I can't. And because I feel like there are some instances where I can't, I don't care to want to bring in groups of people, come over to my house, things like that, share as much until you find that tribe or that group. So yeah.
Yeah. And I know you are a giver. I mentioned at the top of the episode when you are William's friend. You truly are William's friend in every sense of the word, and I certainly have benefited from that. I will say your reflection is evoking some things in me because I've only been in the area now for a little more than 2 years. And so, in many ways, still finding, my footing and building a social circle. Obviously, I've now leaned into, my typical hobbies. I tell everyone tennis, church, the gym. And fortunate that I do have people like you who are here as well. But I think it's an interesting reflection because oftentimes the context you're in could sometimes provide challenges to your ability to meet your own expectations for authenticity. And I've never quite reflected in that way until I heard you, just share your reflection. Um, so just sitting with that for a moment. But yeah, that the context itself could stand in the way. The fact that people are relatively, I won't say relatively, but can be transient, right? It's a political city. And so, depending on the nature of people's jobs, every 2 years, every 4 years, they could be in and out. Um, and I do feel like the evolution of people is more rapid here than other
Yeah.
places, how you describe. um,
Mhm.
so that resonates. I did just get a note. The song you mentioned earlier in the episode, Mary J. Blige covering sort of Barry White's beat, "You Bring Me Joy."
Yes, yes. That was one of my wore it out. Wore that song
Yes,
completely out.
yeah. Shout out to Marcus for getting that. Marcus, as I've mentioned, consummate, yes, producer, studio owner, sound engineer, all the things, and so he was able to get that for us. So I want to pivot. I know we're getting close to time, but I want to talk about sort of joy as an aspect because it's one of the things we don't lean into enough. And one question I have for you is how do you stay grounded in gratitude and joy?
Really just, one, having coming from the family that I came from. So, we're still very close and have several text threads, with my cohort, I call them because I did grow up with my nieces and nephews. So we have most people are like my cousins, but I grew up with my nieces and nephews and also, my brothers and sisters, all of that. So having a big family has helped me be grounded. Having a big family where they will openly say they love you has been really helpful and keeps you grounded. And I'll share a note. My father called me earlier last week, and he says he loves me, often, but it always hits, when it's like this 89-year-old black man having no issue with telling his son, and we can throw out his gay son that he loves him, and I think that helps a tremendous amount. And then also just having friends who keep you in line and all of that. So people who aren't just there to blow your head up, but also to tell you need to calm down and chill out. So that helps. And then church does as well. Having a church home here has been helpful as well.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on something I shared in my own reflection, right? The idea of being affirmed first at home, because everything we do starts at home. And so the idea of being affirmed at home, we could certainly have a whole episode on what you just laid out in terms of the father son dynamic, and especially when you get into men of color who are fathers and then sons, and then you add in other layers of identity. Others certainly have talked about it. But I think you touch on something very salient, right? Like the idea that I'm affirmed at home, and so no matter what is happening around me, I know that my family loves me. And that in turn does help me to love myself. I know that not everyone comes from a loving family, and so they have to learn how to love themselves through other foundations. But having that, I think, is very crucial and blessed. Both you and I are blessed, I believe, to be able to say that. Um, yeah, I'm sitting with that also because that was very salient that you mentioned. So we've talked about what things that bring you joy and gratitude, and you mentioned, being able to stay grounded in, your family and allowing that to help you navigate. So I want to think back to you talked about the transitions you've had. You've worked in many different career spaces. You've had lots of personal and professional goals that you're still working toward. How has your definition of success changed? Or has it? So if you think back to young William, who was just starting out, college graduate, and may have had a vision for his life, how has that evolved?
I think I want to go to like having these common threads throughout my life. So it was all like success to me was home ownership, having a partner, all but the job was just kind of like the maybe a catalyst or the ability for me to be successful, but it didn't matter what I was doing. So I think, and also really now I don't want to, it's not deep, but as a child, I knew that there were certain things that my parents could and could not do. So I was in gymnastics and learned that it's a fairly white sport, right? And the school that I was going to did not have gymnastics. So it was always like an early pivot in my life was, okay, well, they don't have gymnastics. They have track and field. I can do that. And that's been my attitude just throughout my life. All right. I did architecture. I thought I would like it. Did it for a decade just to, just to really make sure I did. And I was like, it's not something that I'm particularly excited about. And professors as well as, uh, firm owners and they would all they allowed me to share and then be in this space and I really appreciated it, but it wasn't resonating with me deeply. And then that's when I was like, all right, pivot, because now it's either you're gonna get serious about this and get into it, or you pivot. And I felt like I wanted to definitely try something different. And that's when I worked for the Phoenix Urban League, and that kind of really awakened something in me, and that community was very important. Organizing in the community is very important, and being able to uh, understand what the community was going through was very important, more than architecture was. And that's when like that bug bit me. And so throughout my life, success meant how do you pivot? Because you might not always enjoy what you're doing, or you may not have the means to stay in it. So why I didn't continue with gymnastics was that we didn't live in the right township. So you got to be able to go and hit it and do something else. What else can you do? What else are you good at? So, but that's been successful to me. But then the common threads are family, relationship, having some stability and owning a home and all of that. That's what true success for me meant, was something that's really grounds you in stability. And jobs aren't stable enough for me. So,
Yeah. No, I mean, once again, I heard you mention the word pivot, and I think sometimes, and I can speak even for me, there have been periods in my life where, you feel so loyal or married to a cause or an ambition because you grew up, you invested, your education and all the student loan dollars, and you're like, I have to stick with this thing. But if you're not finding fulfillment, it takes courage. I don't know if you've processed it in that way, probably not because you're humble, but it takes courage to be able to say, this isn't fulfilling. I need to think about what I can do differently that might be more fulfilling. It also takes risk because you
right.
invest. And so, yeah, it takes risk and vulnerability, because then we have to say to ourselves, I might have been wrong, or I might have misunderstood, or give ourselves permission to say, okay, this is what I used to like, but I no longer like it anymore.
Hmm. Yeah.
So pat yourself
All
on
of
the
the
back.
above. Yeah.
Yeah, pat yourself on the
No.
back.
But yeah, all of that was where I was and how I looked at it, and it's just important to. I wish you can have those Beyonce moments where you just
Hmm.
wake up and you're a singer,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
sometimes that's not life. You just don't know your
Sometimes it's
course.
not life. Jesus. A follow-up question, as someone who's also moved many different places, whether for career opportunities, or for career opportunities especially, I'm curious, if you could reflect on the degree to which that had any impact on shaping the evolution of your vision. Like, I think you mentioned some very key things, right, that kept you grounded: family, faith, just who you were, like those are core. But did any of the places you moved, because all very different, were there any factors in there that contributed to how you saw your sort of definition for success, or approached your definition for success?
Phoenix absolutely had an impact on me as far as just knowing that I didn't want a relationship. I knew that Phoenix was not the place, but I also owned a home there, and having to really reassess, sell the house, and just say that if I were to own a home again in a relationship, I would want it to be joint. So everything to and people are it's risk. It's definitely a risk, and people are seemingly afraid of. Uh, doing that, but that was something that I learned from Phoenix. Like moving in with someone is very hard, and making their place your place or your place their place, that's not easy. But if you guys both are purchasing a place together and your place is your place, both of your place, it's a lot different. And I think that's what Phoenix taught me because I tried. I
Yeah,
tried
yeah,
to
yeah,
be like, oh, you can stay with me, and then it's like, no, you
yeah,
can't. Get
yeah.
out my house.
Ah,
So,
yes.
um, and then my time back home in Chicago definitely just reminded me of why I love Chicago and I don't want to live there. So, and New York
It is
gave me
great
a
to
piece of
visit.
myself that I couldn't. Yeah, right, right.
Yeah.
Especially in the summer.
Yes. Great place to be.
Uh, yeah, and New York kind of gave me a piece of myself back that I was missing in all of my moves, which was a little bit of confidence and fun. So, and then moved here and boring and a homebody, but I don't mind that. I like that.
Yeah.
It's that next stage and phase. So,
It's so once again listening to you, I think DC is my New York, if you will. DC has been my New York because if you know, right, for the viewers who don't know, so William, born and raised in Chicago, I'm adjacent, born and raised in Gary, and then we both found ourselves in Phoenix, although a few years apart, for our to start our professional journeys. Mine did not end with me going to another metropolis. Mine ended with me going to Reno, Nevada, which was, less diverse. I'm grateful for the time that I lived there, learned how to ski, snowboard, but it wasn't the vision I had for the life I wanted to live. And one thing I'll touch on, you mentioned dating in Phoenix. Dating deserts is what I call some of these places. Um, so we'll have to have a whole conversation on that, but dating deserts. But moved to Reno for work. Was blessed to be there. Met some great friends, did some great things. But when I think about the fullness of what I wanted out of life, Reno was not going to provide that for me. And then I was then blessed to move here to DC, where in many ways DC has been, as I say, my New York. What New York was to you as you describe it is helping me in that way. So I can certainly relate. So lesson one, don't be afraid to move. If you're currently in a place where you're not being served, you heard it from William, you heard it from me, don't be afraid. Pivot. William actually said that to find a new destination. One that's in more alignment with what you want out of life or who you want to be. Um, so in this segment of More to Carry With You, I just want to recap a couple of things that I've heard from William. I mean, there's so many gems that he's given us, but what we know about living authentically is that it's a daily practice. William talked about how he practices living authentically and what those activities look like and mean for him. You also heard the theme of relationships as being fundamental to living authentically. Whether you're tapping into the love of your family, the love of a partner, the love of a friendship circle, and even more importantly, the love of yourself. And then, third, I think the key takeaway is not being afraid to pivot, right? We all have dreams and goals and aspirations and things we want to work toward. Life happens. And when it does, don't be fearful of what change may be required to either help you evolve or put you back on track. So, before we round out our conversation today, Will, I have one thing I want to ask you, one last thing. Can you tell us something that made you laugh recently?
ooh, something that made me laugh recently. That's a tough one. I'm always laughing, so I'm like trying to go through. Is it a comedian that I watched?
Yeah.
So I guess this is a little telling about me. Is that anyone can get me to laugh. So I know this particular comedian is not, he has his trans issues, yada yada yada. But just in watching Dave Chappelle had me in stitches, and also just so sometimes on the weekend we just find things to watch, go on Netflix, what's going on, and so that's been something funny for me just to unwind and listen to a comedian that I like, regardless of how
Yeah,
controversial that person may be.
yeah.
Um,
Politics is ever present, and so, like I say, even in the most difficult of spaces, you got to find the joy. And sometimes you need a good laugh, and sometimes you got to separate the person from the professional. Um, I've had to say that in my daily course of professional life, and so, you know, separate the comedian from the person sometimes. Um, but who doesn't love a good comedy show also? So there you have that.
listen,
Right. So to the audience, as we prepare to wrap up this conversation, I have one reflection question for you. When people spend time with you, what is one thing you want them to remember most about you? William, thank you so much for this conversation and for the way you show up in the world. And to everyone listening, living authentically doesn't require a dramatic life change. It begins with one honest decision at a time. If you'd like to explore more episodes, connect, or learn more about the show, you can visit my website at returntomore.com. You can visit Apple Podcasts at Return to More or my YouTube channel at Return to More. All I ask is that you like, subscribe, and share. And until we return, may you continue returning to the truest version of yourself. Be well.